Week 17 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few kickers I would start this week. The first kicker, Brandon Aubrey of the Dallas Cowboys. So Mr. Automatic pretty much all season long. 14 field goals, 50-plus yards this season. So kicking some field goals all season long is Brandon Aubrey. He's got one of the best boots, if not the best boot, in all the NFL. And this week in a matchup at Philly where they know they got to put points on the board is this Cowboy team. I believe they're going to trot him out there 50, 55 yards like we saw in last week's game. And they got confidence in him, and rightfully so. So the last few weeks, Week 14 versus Cincinnati, 9. Week 15 at Carolina, 16. And Week 16 versus Tampa Bay, 21 fantasy points. So this week with a decent matchup and a game they know they got to put points on the board, he's definitely a kicker. I would start the next kicker, Jake Elliott, staying in the same game of the Philadelphia Eagles. I know he's had his struggles at times, Jake Elliott, but the last couple weeks here, he's starting to put points on the board, double-digit fantasy games 2 weeks in a row. So Week 17, a good matchup versus the Cowboys. Give up the 11th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Elliott last week, a big game with 19 fantasy points. So this week, they're going to put points on the board. And let's say Kenny Pickett is the starting quarterback. There's going to be a lot of drives where they stall out and have to settle for field goals in this one. So I believe Jake Elliott, once again, coming in off of 2 good games as a start. This week, the next start, Cameron Dicker of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Dicker, one of the best kickers in all pro football this season. He's accurate. He's putting up fantasy points weekly. And when you're playing the Dome as well, majority of your games, you can put up good points and you don't have to deal with the weather. But this week, he will have to deal with the weather at New England, Gillette Stadium. Obviously, cold out there. But I believe Cameron Dicker could go out there and have a good game. So the last few weeks, Week 14 at Kansas City, 5. Week 16 versus Tampa, 6. And Week 16 versus Denver, 10 fantasy points. So this week in New England, I think it's a game. It could be a grind-out type of game between these two teams where it's going to be cold weather and have to settle for field goals. So Dicker this week, I believe, goes out there once again. And it wouldn't be surprising if he has a double-digit fantasy day. Next start, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Chris Boswell, it's been a great season for him. 50-plus yards. He's been automatic all season long. And he's on a Steeler offense that stalls out a lot and have to settle for field goals. So it's pretty much 7 or more fantasy points, worst case, for Boswell it's been this season. Week 14 versus Cleveland, 11. Week 15 at Philadelphia, 8. Week 16 at Baltimore, 7. And this week versus the Kansas City Chiefs here, where they know they got to put points on the board to keep up with them. And the Steelers are home. I think he's going to trot out there for a few field goals. Once again, is Boswell. Like I said, 50, 55-plus yards. They're very confident he could go out there and hit them. And this week, where you need points on the board early and often, even though this Chief offense isn't what it once was over the last couple seasons this year, I still believe Boswell's going to get opportunities, and he's a start this week in the 5th and final kicker. I look to start Jake Bates of the Detroit Lions. So Jake Bates, when you're in a high-powered offense and arguably the best offense in all pro football, you're going to get a lot of weeks where you're putting up double-digit fantasy points. So this week, a matchup at San Francisco, pretty good matchup, obviously. In the last few weeks, 3 out of 4 weeks, double-digit fantasy points for Bates. 13 versus Chicago, 12. Week 14 versus the Packers, 11. Week 15 versus Buffalo, 6. And Week 16 at the Bears, 10 fantasy points. So this week with a good matchup at San Francisco, where their defense has been bend but don't break at times. The kickers have had success. He's definitely a kicker I would start this week. Anytime you're on an offense that scores in the mid-20s to high 30s range, you're going to get opportunities weekly, and that's exactly been the case with Bates this season. So that's a few kickers I would start for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.